So we have already looked at how the tested bosses in the PTR looked like, their mechanics, you know, how they played out. However, now it's time to look at the specs playing those bosses. We are looking at the PTR results of the DPS for the heroic bosses number 4, 5, 6, and 7 that were tested on Friday. I'm gonna give you the spoiler immediately. I'm gonna tell you who the OP specs are, and likely the ones who are gonna be nerfed. The top 3 specs across the 4 bosses in the PTR were Balance Druid, Marksmanship Hunter, and Shadow Priest, with a good mention also for BM Hunter. So what's going down right now is that Balance Druid is completely broken. Yes, I know this damage graph makes no sense, but that's exactly what Balance Druid is doing right now as Keeper of the Grove. This is your burst window of a Balance Druid. You can look for your Star Surges. You pull out your Dryad doing your Celestial alignment, and your Dryad crits for 50 million damage per Star Surge. And then crits again for another 50 million damage, and then normal hit for only 22 million damage, and then another 50 million damage crit. And then you yourself hit for only a 35 million damage hit with your Star Surge, and then back to a 61 million damage crit on your Star Surge. This is the problem right now for Balance. Basically, your Dryad is not doing what is intended with its tier set. When you're playing Druid and you're playing Keeper of the Grove, casting CA calls upon a Dryad for 10 seconds that casts Star Surge at 70% effectiveness. Now, your Star Surges at 70% effectiveness are not meant to be this powerful. You look at the Keeper of the Grove Druid right now, remember, in the PTR, you are being tested at 676 item level, so it's even weaker than this current Balance Druid, and you see your Star Surge is hitting for 4 million. So a 70% effectiveness Star Surge from the Dryad should be around 3 million damage. Instead, she's hitting for like 22 million damage base and 50 million crits, which is much more than this. Obviously, because she's hitting way harder, then the 4-piece goes out of control. When your Dryad fades, so the Balance Druid's 2 next Star Surges will damage for an additional amount equal to 5% of all of your DPS done in the time frame of your CA. And because your Dryad is hitting for so much, your next 2 Star Surges will start critting for 60+ million damage. This is obviously a bug which will get nerfed, and it will no longer look like this ridiculous graph of damage for Balance Druid, where basically all of your damage is within only your CAs on a 1-minute CD. You just pull them out, pull the Dryad out. Average Star Surge of a Dryad is 26 million damage. You know, it's gonna be fixed. So it's hard to gauge the power of Balance Druid right now because of the value that this Dryad is currently giving Balance Druid. But for now, it was basically the better performer of the DPS across 4 bosses, which are relevant bosses because they are not entry-level easy bosses. They are bosses number 4, 5, 6, and 7. So it's like Styx, Sprocket, One-Armed Bandit, and Magzi for the next tier. The next OP one is Hunter. After the changes to the Dark Ranger tier set and the buff given to the Dark Ranger tier set, the changes that now you get 30 seconds of flat CDR on your Black Arrow that you got a few days ago. So you have Black Arrow damage flat out increase, Black Powder damage flat out increase, as well as the CDR we mentioned, and then more importantly, the 4-piece. Withering Fire's Black Arrow damage is increased by 25%, and Consuming Death Blow has a 30% chance to cause all Black Arrow barrages during your next Withering Fire to fire additional Black Arrows. This, for the non-Hunter players, means Withering Fire is what you get empowered on when you use your True Shot, which your talents already reduced by roughly 30 seconds, and then your new tier set will bring down by another 30 seconds, so this is now a 1-minute CD basically. When you use it, your Black Arrow will basically become empowered in that window, and you can see it very clearly in this damage window. Basically, you do 2.5 million DPS outside of True Shot, and then inside of True Shot you have the damage increase pretty much. It becomes even more visible when you do the split inside of the execute phase. So you have way more death blow procs or availability of death blow because you are in execute phase, so death blow is available, which turns into black arrow, of course, and that's the much increased damage of black arrow in execute phase of marksmanship hunter. Obviously it looks a bit jarring, right, to see a spec doing more than 50% of its damage of a single mechanic, a single hero talent ability, practically, black arrow, but that's what it is for marksmanship. It's basically 3 to 4 buttons, and that's the damage they are doing with the new tier set. This is very, very good. This was a pure single target fight, Fractilius, by the way. This was a cleave 3 target fight, which is very good for hunter. Marksmanship has great weaknesses in doing large AoE windows of damage, but when it comes to 5 targets basically or below, marksmanship is more than fine in doing AoE damage, or cleave damage. So very good results on this cleave fight, pure single target fight. Marksmanship was second, right below, of course, the sea of abusing balanced druids, and then Nexus King Saladar, which was the more, I guess, a damage profile changing one, since you have a 1 target moment, an AoE moment with the odds, and then back to 2 target cleave, and then down to single target again. Marksmanship was still overall the best across all of these fights. Now you have, of course, we mentioned the mention to give to BM, because BM was also consistently towards the top as well. Now BM is, in terms of the buffs given to Hunter, overall BM is not going the Dark Ranger path, but still going in the pack leader powers, which are still very good for BM, as we mentioned when we checked the tier sets first. This is still powerful for Beastmaster. It's just that right now, as we mentioned also, it was being overshadowed by the power level of the tier set given to marksmanship, but in and of itself BM is still doing great damage. The other spec that was performing very well, that you can see here, quite present towards the top of the results, is Shadow Priest. So Shadow Priest, after the buffs, I guess the mini rework given to Shadow plus the buffs given to its tier set, is now playing Void Weaver. Void Weaver was already the hero talent of choice of Shadow Priest. Anyways, Archon was more of an option in Mythic class. Void Weaver was already the chosen option for single target, and now the tier set is even stronger for single target. This is very strong, right? Even a casual Shadow Priest players can realize that buffing Void Blast by 40% in damage plus 20% faster cast time and even a half duration cooldown is still very powerful. And then the 4-piece as well, Void Blast now also causing Entropic Rift to grow, and the final explosion of the Rift doing more damage based on how often you made it grow. And more importantly, all of this growing will cause the damage of your next Void Torrent to be increased by 200%. We mentioned last time how all of this damage amp could have resulted in for Shadow Priest. The results are pretty visible. Void Torrent now is doing 12% of your damage when it used to be like 4 or 5%, because it does, look at this, average cast of a single Void Torrent now is 22 million damage in, what was that, like a 3-second cast, 22 million damage. It's like a 7 million damage per second you're doing by channeling Void Torrent, because it gets empowered by upwards of 200% with the new tier set. And then of course Void Blast itself doing more damage. This is the Saladar, which does have an AoE window you can abuse in the intermission, which is what Shadow Priests are doing in here. That's why it looks a bit cheesy, because of the AoE damage they are doing. But even if you move to a pure single target boss like Fractilius, you can see it more clearly. The very clear damage bumps where the teal color is Void Torrent, right? You see all of the damage, of course, being Void Weaver, starting with the creation of the Entropic Rift with Void Torrent, and Void Torrent itself jumping up significantly in damage. What we mentioned last time, this one is doing 19 million damage on cast on average on this ability, so massively empowered ability for Shadow Priest. It has been also buffed, by the way, in 11.2 in the next tier. If you go in the PTR, before you needed 2 talents to reduce the cooldown down to 30 seconds from 45. Now it's a base 30-second cooldown. The follow-up is now the free Void Volley that you get, which is just, again, free damage. This used to be a talent to reduce the cooldown of Void Torrent. Now it's free 6% more damage. You're spending the same talent point to bringing this down to 30 seconds, and you're gaining this in return. Plus the mega damage increase of Void Volley because of your tier set. So all of these things combined have made Shadow Priest be very, very good in the raid right now. The best of the specs together with marksmanship and BM, you know, the two ranged hunters as a whole, both the pack leader version for BM and the Dark Ranger version for marksmanship, and then balance with the, I guess, the asterisk of this ridiculousness of their Dryad hitting for 50 million star surges, which is not, of course, gonna be going like this for more than, I wouldn't even give it a week before Blizzard fixes this. Now, as for the other specs, maybe you're wondering about, okay, I see who is doing the best, but who is also doing the worst right now? There weren't really many consistent bad performers. It was more of a case of like rotating bad results on a boss by boss basis. On average, the rogues were doing the worst possibly. You have Subtlety doing decently on the first boss, and then they are all middle to bottom of results on Soul Hunter, which is a 3-target cleave fight. On pure single target, all 3 rogues are towards the bottom, and then on Nexus King they are also not doing too well. Take in mind that all of these are tanks and healers. So the DPS actually start from here. So they are towards the bottom. Same with Unholy. Unholy has been going towards the bottom, possibly because of the strike DK players are on. Although to be honest, Frost DK wasn't doing nearly as bad. Now, surprisingly, despite the calls of OPness, which were true, the tier set seemed to be great for Warlocks. Warlocks weren't doing nearly as well in these results. Together with obviously Augmentation Evoker was doing quite poorly. Perhaps the bigger surprise is Devastation doing also poorly, because, you know, technically you go back to the current results on this current tier to give yourself an idea of what you can expect in the PTR. So you look at the stats, you look at Devastation being at the top for several months in this tier, right? So you go back to the results and Devastation is not really doing anything special, despite, of course, pure single target on a lowish HP boss and a short duration. It's a 3-minute boss fight. Basically, if you look at the kill timers here, it barely goes above 180. In fact, it doesn't even go past 3 minutes. So it's a very, very short fight. But maybe you would have expected Devastation to be doing better, although overall it's still towards the top half of the results. Perhaps to give out some copium or hopium, you have both of the Shaman specs doing decently across different damage profiles. Especially overall enhancement is the one who has been doing best across melee specs. It has been one of the more consistent ones together with Havoc Demon Hunter, which actually was perhaps the overall better performing melee DPS spec. Because of course we mentioned BM, we mentioned Marksmanship, Shadow Priest, Balanced Druid, we haven't actually mentioned a single melee spec. Havoc Demon Hunter has been doing very well. Of course playing Aldrachi, not playing Felskard. The tier set actually is not really that visible in here. It's not that you see some major extra thing like we have seen for some of the other specs, because it's very passive in terms of power increase. You know, Reaver's Glaive damage being increased by 60%, for example. So this has been increased from like 4% to 6%, which is like whatever. It's not that big of a deal, right? The bigger power is of course the 4-piece set bonus, where you get the 2 sides of your Aldrachi hero talent empowered. When Blade Dance is cast after Chaos Strike, you get 12 total slashes. Now Reaver's Mark stacks up to 3 times and further empowers Chaos Strike when cast after Blade Dance, applying an additional stack. You know, this is all very, very passive as a Demon Hunter. Whenever you choose which one of the 2 you want to empower as an Aldrachi Reaver, after your empowerment happens on Art of the Glaive, if you go left or if you go right, whichever one of the 2, they have now been empowered, but you still go on the same logic for AoE and for single target. It's just now doing more as an Aldrachi Reaver in terms of effects. We mentioned overall Havoc was the best melee performing DPS. The second best overall has been Windwalker. We have mentioned, of course, across all of them it was also Enhancement doing pretty well, but Havoc and Windwalker have been doing the best overall. So Windwalker, as we mentioned also for Mistweaver, has the same very good it just feels good to proc this, the Conduit of the Celestial tier set. When you use Slicing Winds, you always proc Heart of the Jade Serpent, and now Heart of the Jade Serpent also gives you 15% haste for 4 seconds on top of the 8 seconds of duration. So it's a 12-second long 15% haste buff after every Slicing Winds. And of course, you playing Conduit already as a monk, you have Heart of the Jade Serpent, which gives you CDR whenever you use Strike of the Windlord. So over 8 seconds, you will gain 6 more seconds, so a total of 14 seconds of CDR to Strike of the Windlord, Fist of Fury, Rising Sun Kick, Flying Serpent Kick, and Whirling Dragon Punch. So you use your Strike of the Windlord. After 8 seconds, you can use your Slicing Winds, and you get 8 more seconds of Heart of the Jade Serpent for 16 seconds total of 12 seconds of extra cooldown reduction. On top of this, because of the buff you get from the tier set, you also gain 15% more haste throughout all of this duration, which is also very good. Obviously, you would have to play into this. This lines up very well because what do you know? Strike of the Windlord has a 30-second cooldown, Slicing Winds also has a 30-second cooldown, so they're very easy to use close to each other, even though Strike of the Windlord technically has a shorter cooldown, because this always procs Heart of the Jade Serpent, which gives you 6 more seconds of CDR to Strike of the Windlord. So technically, Strike of the Windlord really has a 24-second cooldown, but you have to play around it. If you look at this monk, for example, in this burst window, he's using Slicing Winds and he's using Strike of the Windlord next to each other. Basically one GCD after the other. So basically he is doubling up on the Heart of the Jade Serpent buff. So he's not extending this whatsoever. He's actually wasting the duration of Heart of the Jade Serpent, which is not the way you would want to go if you wanted to fully use your tier set. But even then though, the performance of Windwalker overall as a melee DPS has been the best one, together with Havoc and with Enhancement. When it comes to the range DPS, it's definitely Marksmanship, Shadow, Balance, and BM, with the asterisk of the current situation of the shenanigans around the performance of the Keeper of the Grove Dryad of Balanced Druid, which is causing situations like this one, which we're not really sure this will stay for any longer, really. But even when this gets nerfed, the power is still quite good for Balanced Druid, for burst damage in the raid, which is always a very good profile to have, because burst damage windows are very important in the raid. So even after this will be nerfed, it's still a very powerful, at the very least, damage profile in theory for Balanced Druid. However, this is what we have seen in the first 4 bosses being tested in the PTR when it comes to the best results of the DPS specs. Of course, this will be bound to change as we go deeper down the PTR window, more balance tuning, as well as more testing and change of the tier sets, as well as in about a couple of weeks, we're also getting the Mythic raid testing in the PTR. So we can also check even better how things look when it comes to Mythic bosses, 20 men for all groups, as well as more perhaps balance tuning happening. We get to see more perhaps serious results than what we have seen today. So for today, we can now give it a rest on checking out on the spec results on the PTR, and we're starting our goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, yep, I've talked just about enough before getting my throat too dry.